Hello, welcome to English 1. This is week 17 of the spring semester, and this is our Thursday at, it's 10, right? Yes, 10 o'clock. Sometimes I get my times mixed up here. Let's go ahead and start with a word of prayer. God, we thank you so much for this day. I thank you for this class and this group of students and their willingness to delve deep into text and to push themselves out of their comfort zones to really learn to appreciate the way that pieces are written, even if they don't necessarily love the writing or the plot, but just the willingness and the ability even to just kind of delve in there and appreciate what is there. I pray that you would be with our class today, that your favor would fall upon us, and that you would bless our conversation. In your name, amen. Okay, I know I say this every week, but we have so much to cover, so let's go ahead and jump in. What is one pet peeve that you have? In my Monday section, I had a person that typed out an entire paragraph on the whiteboard, so I'm sure some of you have far more pet peeves than others, but if you had to choose just one, what would that pet peeve be? Loud chewing, all right. Bad French accents, like fake ones? Or people who are trying to learn, okay. All right. When people in Vermont say, I have no idea. Is that a Vermont thing? Interesting. In the South, people say, there are several things they say. Sometimes they say idea. They say wash instead of wash. I'm from the South, but bless your heart. I know, Willie, you've been to the South, haven't you? Bless your heart is like this almost acceptable way of being condescending to someone. Frustrating, yeah, is another one. Willie was born in Arkansas. There you go. Used to live in Tennessee. So you guys know some of that, right? Born and raised. Well, I wasn't born in Georgia, but I was raised in Georgia. So, all right, other pet peeves that you have. You know, I was realizing earlier this week when I asked this question that my pet peeves really center around Facebook. So I think that means I should get off Facebook. Not watching Star Wars. Come on. That's not a pet peeve. That would mean that you're annoyed like literally most of the time. Unless, of course, you watch Star Wars most of the time. What about people who confuse Star Wars and Star Trek? Does that bother you? Most of the time it bothers people who are pretty hardcore. Born in Virginia, born in Connecticut. Awesome. People standing too close to you, or a lot of people talking loudly at once. Yeah. Trekkies in general bother you. Okay. When your cat tries to open the door to his room. Oh, he does that? Really? Can he actually do it, or does he just try? That's a real pet peeve because it's about a pet. When one person's talking to you very loudly. All right. So I don't really know if I can pick a specific one. Like I said, many of mine seem to focus around Facebook, so I think that means it's time for me to take a break from Facebook. Don't like it when you're sitting with people and they're all on their phones. Yeah, that's really annoying, isn't it, Laurel? That's actually probably my mother's biggest pet peeve. When you're trying to talk to someone, their headphones are too loud. They have to be careful about that. They could go deaf, right? Then they're shouting at you to answer. Right. You guys have some good ones. All right. Right, that's why they have their headphones up so loud, of course. All right, let's go ahead and move on. Hopefully, you will not experience any of these minor annoyances in class today. A couple of notes for you. definitely try to make sure that you're not getting behind. I don't think I noticed that quite as much in this section as I did in the Monday section. That could have just been because it was over the weekend. But make sure you get your week 16 work in as soon as possible, or it will stay a 0. I don't believe anyone from this class requested. Actually, there may be one person that requested an extension for this week, but just you really, I know that this book is a little more complicated. It's a little harder to get into, but you don't want to get behind, because we're going to go, we'll finish up this book, we'll read a couple of short stories, then we go straight into a paper, then we go straight into another book. So it really can snowball if we're not careful. So make sure that you stay on pace as often as possible. Just a quick reminder, I know that you guys know this from last semester, but just a quick reminder that discussion forums are mandatory. I mean, I suppose they're not mandatory. You have a choice, but if you want a 100 on them, then they are mandatory to participate in. Willie says, people who are just really rude about an opposing belief. Oh, yes. See, this is part of my beef with social media, because people get so bold, and I don't think they would be like that in real life. Or if they were, I certainly wouldn't want to know them. Right. Our culture really has lost that ability to have a civil debate. And that's, I think, very detrimental, actually. So hopefully it'll swing back around at some point. But for now, it's where we are, right? If you miss a discussion, that's a great question, Isabel. If you miss a discussion, it closes before you're able to post. I can't reopen it. Well, I technically could. I won't reopen it because that causes a little bit of confusion. But if it's something like you were sick, or you were traveling, or you had extra ballet practice or whatever, and you still want to respond, you can always ask me if you can email the response. And most of the time I can accept those responses emailed to me. That doesn't really give you the same experience as participating in the discussion forum, but it at least lets me see your thoughts. All right, moving on. Take a quick look at these literary terms again. We're not going to go over them unless there's one that you just really are uncertain of. You will need them as we are talking through things today and as you continue reading this week. Characterization in particular is going to be very important in this novel, because remember that with realism and naturalism, it focuses in on character development more than plot development. That doesn't mean that plot is absent. Obviously, you have to have plot to have a story, but it really, really hones in on character. So that characterization piece is going to be very important for you to see. All right, are we good here? Okay, allegory is, it's like a story that has that's meant to stand for something else. So it has like a hidden meaning, and often that's a political or some sort of social undertone that's tied to it. Parables can be allegorical. Some of the ones that Jesus told were a little bit allegorical. Not all of them, but some. So Sky, the way that the paper will work for this book is that, oh, you know what? I just totally switched into, I'm sorry, we're not even really, well, we are talking about realism, but I just, for 1 second, thought we were talking about Red Badge of Courage, which is my next class. I need more sleep. Let me switch out my books. Okay. No, for this paper, you're going to have the same thing as you have with some, not the characterization paper, the paper 3 that you did, but you'll have basically 4 or 5 topics, and you can choose. So some of you may choose to really focus in on a character, but you might choose to write something different. Okay. The Red Badge of Courage is a good book, but not one that we're covering in here. All right, reflection. How did your reading go this week, and what is your opinion of the novel so far? If you would like to come on mic, obviously, I love to hear your voice, but you can also use chat if needed. Okay, Ray says it was great. Remember, I know that not every book in this class is going to be your cup of tea, so you might really not like this one, and that's okay. You like it, but you don't like the amount of dishonesty. All right, have enjoyed it so far. Hard to follow. Seems like Our Town, but not quite as good. Okay, that exploration of what makes a community is certainly present. The style of writing, yeah, but you got over it. Okay. Like it so far, good, but it's really complicated. It does take a while to read, not only because the sentence structure is complicated and the ideas are kind of complex, but also because some of her, well, the book is meant to make you think and reflect, right? Definitely can be hard to follow. It does get more conversational the deeper you get into it. Remember the first several pages, well, really the first several chapters were more set up than anything else. Reading was pretty good, hard to follow, yep. Okay, the author does kind of break that barrier at times and goes off explaining more abstract thoughts, and that's part of the exploration of it. So she takes these thoughts that she has, these opinions that she has, and she places them against the backdrop of her story. And so that's interesting to kind of see that narrative emerging throughout this, but certainly it can take a little bit of time to get used to that, and you may have to reread. It's not quite as bad as that, Laurel. Laurel said it's like she'd make a whole page out of the sentence, the dog walked happily. Sometimes difficult to comprehend the conversations that are going on. Okay, Sky ended up making a character chart. Yeah, especially when you get to the part where they're in the Rainbow Tavern, you all of a sudden you're kind of like thrown into this slew of characters, and it can be very difficult to pay attention to who is who. So a character chart is a good idea. Good story. Okay, so the consensus is there are some good things in the story, but that it is a little more complex. Okay, the dialogue is realistic, right? It has some of that colloquialism, so you might have some misspellings, the apostrophes, that sort of thing, and you have to slow down to think about what word that is. Yep, she's trying to get some of that dialect in there, and of course when we read it, it doesn't sound quite the same as what it would, because this is not in America, right? This is in the English countryside, so they would have had a different way of speaking. So even when we read it, I mean, I have to remind myself of that occasionally, because I'll be reading and then I'm like, wait, that's not actually what they would have sounded like, but definitely kind of cool. Okay, let's move on. Did you guys do your annotating this week? And if so, what sorts of things did you mark? If your book doesn't look like this graphic, that's okay. Mine rarely look like that either. I do a lot of shorthand and a lot of underlining. Reading aloud sometimes really does help you focus in, Sky. I have to do that occasionally as well. Some literary devices, all right. Seeing several carrots, agreeing with that. Underlined, and you made some notes, okay. Important quotations. That's not my book. That's just a random graphic. My books don't look like that. In college they did, but maybe it's because I understand my thoughts better, but I do a lot of shorthand. Occasionally I'll write a question in the margin like this, but mostly it's a lot of underlining with some shorthand stuff. I don't fully develop my thoughts. Like right here, it just says impact of home, and I'm not really sure what I mean. I would need to read that quotation again to see. Literary devices, notes, a lot of random underlining. You mark the time that Silas was freaking out about the loss of his money because it shows his true character. It at least shows kind of that rock bottom moment for sure, right? It shows what he had kind of placed his faith in, his worship in direct characterization. I try to stay away from math, Willie, but I wouldn't advise you to do that. Okay, good. We will go ahead and hopefully you'll be able to share some of the things that you annotated as the class goes on. But we're going to go ahead and look at a couple of quick journals here. Now, you guys can't see these. These are set just for me. And remember, it'll show up in your grade book as like, it'll say AJ, check 1, check 2, and so forth and so on. Not every week will necessarily have a journal check, but I will, as far as grading is concerned, but I will be checking in. You won't know when that's coming or when it's not, but you will have an AJ check 1 in your book very soon. So here are just a couple of examples in case you would like to see what they look like. And I know that all of you are going to spotlight different things, and that's totally fine. In fact, it's to be expected. Okay, quotation that stuck out to you. Marner did not want to punish him, but only to get back his gold, which had gone from him. This quote is significant because it is character development. It shows Silas's love of his gold, but also a good person on the inside. Most men would desire revenge. Silas just wants things to be righted. I think it is important to know that he doesn't really want that revenge. He just feels like if he had his money back, everything would be solved. Hi, Kristen, no problem. Identification of 3 to 5 literary devices. You can see that this person chose some irony, foil, and a metaphor. A question that you had while reading: why was the inclusion of the long conversation between some of the men in Raveloe necessary? We're actually going to get to that question today, so I'm glad someone asked it. A quotation that you think points toward theme, social issue, symbolism, characterization. She never had a will of her own. A woman has no call for one if she's got a proper man for her husband. I think this quote points to theme, especially knowing what I know about the author, a woman who was in a position that was typically a man's. This is when the squire is talking to Godfrey about his marriage, and I think it points to the fact that the author disagrees with what the squire has said. Do you remember that Eliot is going to explore basically any kind of social role that was present at this time? One thing that you liked or disliked. I like that Marner is not a typical hero. He's not kind, nice, or heroic, or put into a position where he must become a likable character, but you can still like him. That's also kind of characteristic of realism. You have more real life sort of characters and less fantastical, heroic sort of characters. So definitely this is a nice annotating journal. Okay. Loved how Eliot described happiness in context of Godfrey's situation. It's an entire paragraph, so she didn't quote all of it. That's totally fine. 3 to 5 literary devices again. One question: whether or not Nancy Lemiter knows about Godfrey being married to Molly. I found that whole situation kind of confusing. That's okay if you find it confusing, for sure. Nancy does not know that Godfrey is already married. That's what causes the tension and the strain and the confusion in their relationship. He seemed to weave like the spider from pure impulse without reflection. Every man's work, pursued steadily, tends in this way to become an end in itself, and so to bridge over the loveless chasms of life. This clearly shows how Silas will need to someone to love to be able to recover from his illness. I think that this will be an important theme, so that's a really good one. Oh, good, Willie. Glad that you pulled that out too. Just another one here. Again, they don't all have to look the same. They should be very clearly marked, though. If you don't have questions, that's okay. Notice how the student said, I had no questions this week. I think typically you can probably find some question, but I don't want you necessarily stretching for it. So if you want to say, I had no questions, that's okay. If you say that every week, I'm going to start to question that. Disliked how easy it was for Dunsey to steal gold. We're going to talk quite a lot about Dunsey today, so hope you're ready for that. All right, let's move on to chapter 3. Who is Squire Cass? Just to make sure we're all on the same page here. Some of these questions are more comprehension, but we are going to dig deeper today as well. If you want to come on mic, obviously, that is great. He's the most important man in town. That's right. He is one of the wealthiest men in the town, and in this time, those who had wealth kind of kept the towns running. He is Godfrey and Dunsey's father. Good. Describe the relationship between Godfrey and Dunsey, or Dunstan. Tense is a good word. What else you got? I don't know if they have much brotherly love. It seems a little more sinister than that. They are connected as brothers, but I don't know about the love part. Kind of comical. It's strange. They are, okay, good. I kind of like this idea of rival. Okay, not necessarily real, more kind of like a business thing, a we have to be together sort of thing. Can we also throw the word manipulative in there, or manipulated? Not Godfrey to Dunsey, but Dunsey to Godfrey. I think he kind of has the upper hand, even though he is the younger brother and Godfrey is the heir. Dunsey has this sort of strange power over Godfrey. It would be interesting to know if he had that sort of power before Dunstan found out about Godfrey's secret. That's not quite clear, but I have a feeling that Dunstan has always been manipulative. So anyway. Well, in this case, Willie, it's because Dunstan knows of Godfrey's secret marriage. And so he's kind of hoarding that over him. Right, and he does. He seems to get the better of Godfrey pretty much at every single turn. Okay, what tensions besides the relationship between Godfrey and Dunstan, what tensions are present within this family? I don't know if he is smarter than Godfrey. I think he is wild and reckless and confident. Kind of a dangerous combination. Squire Cass does not know about Godfrey's secret marriage. Godfrey, Dunstan, and Molly, the secret wife, know about the secret marriage. And it's not clear if Molly has told anyone. Okay, so what other tensions are present within this family? I think the secret marriage, we certainly could put that there. Kind of goes along with the tension between Godfrey and Dunsey, but I think the secret marriage could go as its own standalone presence. Okay, between the father and both of his sons, he does threaten to disown them a lot. Whether he's hot-headed or he means it, that doesn't come across as a completely healthy family structure. The Squire and Dunsey, definitely. There's also this weird element where Godfrey almost seems to want to protect Dunstan from the Squire. I don't know why. So there's not necessarily a super open or transparent relationship between the three of them. Oh, good, Krista. They are broke-ish. The wealthiest family in the town is having some serious financial problems. And that's a big deal. Right. I think that Dunstan probably just is this sort of character. I don't think it's just about the secret marriage. And we have evidence of that apart from the secret marriage as well. Godfrey's not the only one having money problems. Squire Cass has... Godfrey maybe is feeling the strain of it more, but Squire Cass is having a few financial problems. And then to go along with what Laurel said about Godfrey, remember they took the money from the tenant and they were supposed to give it to their father, and they didn't. Godfrey gave it to Dunstan instead. Dunstan spent it, did not return it. So Squire Cass thinks the tenant just hasn't paid, when in reality, the tenant paid the sons. And they're going to have to either come up with that money or tell their father the truth very soon, right? They can't just let the tenant take the fall for it. Exactly. Yep. Okay. Truth is their best option. Unfortunately, people don't always see it that way. Or will they? Dun, dun, dun. We'll see, Willie. We'll see. All right, look at the page, the top of page 26 in your book. In what ways does Dunsey shirk responsibility? This isn't just on 26. There are other ways as well, but this is just if you kind of need a refresher. How does Dunstan seem to get out of things? Okay, he threatens. Good. He's incredibly self-centered, so he makes it about himself. If it doesn't benefit him, he's not going to do it, right? He blackmails. Good. Going along with that, he manipulates. I think there's one more thing here that we're kind of missing. He doesn't just threaten and blackmail and make it about himself. He also just doesn't care, right? Exactly. The horse they'll bid for, not the rider. So he manipulates the situation. I don't think Godfrey cares. I'm sorry, Dunsey. I don't think Dunsey cares one lick what happens to anyone else. And so even if he can't manipulate and blackmail and threaten, I think he's just going to be kind of like, who cares, right? He is not the greatest person, whether that's immaturity or that he's just incredibly spoiled and needs a come to Jesus moment. Not real sure, but he certainly is not the best person right now. That's right. He only sees what's in it for him. And if there's nothing in it for him, he can't be bothered to worry about it, right? Why does Godfrey agree to let Dunsey take his horse? This is kind of his prized possession, but he is going to part with it. Why is that? He is desperate. Yeah, they really need the money. It's the only asset he feels like he has to be able to get that money quickly so that their father does not find out the truth, right? He didn't go because see, this is a weird thing. He trusted that Dunstan would be able to get the better deal because he knows that Dunstan is manipulative and can pull one over on people. So he was hoping to get the most money that he could out of it. And that is the other reason is because he wanted to go it wasn't a dance, right? Was it a dance? There was a social engagement of some sort that he also wanted to go to, and Nancy would be there. It might have been a dance. Okay. A birthday party. Okay. Right, because he is lucky. That's right. Dunstan is lucky, which we're going to see a bit of irony with that in a little bit. Okay, Godfrey assumes that having Nancy would make all of his problems go away. We see evidence of this on page 29. Is this true or not? If Godfrey were just able to marry Nancy, would his troubles go away? What do you think? All right, so far, everyone is saying no. Why not? Okay, he's still the same person. Okay. He'd have to lie in order to actually have Nancy. That's right. He still has a secret. There are some things that can be buried this side of heaven, right? And the truth maybe is not known this side of heaven. But there are other things like this. It's really big that you can't just bury for a lifetime. Right. And tucking things under the rug never actually helps anything. It might alleviate some stress for a moment, but then you have to live with the guilt and the paranoia about being found out. It's just really not worth it. He may give her up to the next girl that comes around. Yeah, we don't really understand this whole marriage with Molly thing, right? It's odd. If he is financially well off and he is supposed to have a smart match, someone else who could help really run the estate because he's the heir, why in the world would he go marry someone like Molly who has nothing to offer and nothing to her name, really? Kind of interesting, right? Yeah, part of it could be this idea that he was tricked into it. I think he's kind of trying to shirk responsibility a little bit with that. But anyway, it doesn't make sense. He doesn't appear to have much self-control and much wisdom in the moment, right? So no, his problems would not all go away. A person cannot make our problems go away. Okay, moving right along. On page 30, you'll see this quote. It's almost to the bottom. It's right before that second paragraph there. The yoke a man creates for himself by wrongdoing will breed hate in the kindliest nature. And the good-humored, affectionate-hearted Godfrey Cass was fast becoming a bitter man, visited by cruel wishes that seemed to enter and depart and enter again, like demons who had found in him a ready garnished home. What does this quote show, not just about Godfrey, but about mankind, about human nature? Okay, there are Bible verses that also refer to yoke, right? Don't yoke yourself. Don't be unequally yoked. Jesus's yoke is light, right? Lies are like yokes because they control what we do like strings on a puppet. Yeah, that's a good analogy to use there. You will be controlled by your wrongdoing, right? Unless, of course, how can we get free from that? How can we get free from the sin and the guilt and all of that stuff? Tell the truth, repent, try to right your wrongs, right? Turning to Christ. Yeah. Now, I don't know that Elliot herself was making an argument that you turn to Christ, but I think she certainly, remember, she explores this whole righting of wrongs thing, and she is definitely saying you must repent, you must tell the truth, you must ask for forgiveness, you must try to right your wrongs. Obviously that is easier done and better done through Christ, but she certainly is saying that any sort of wrongdoing that you allow to tie you down, that you allow to yoke you, is going to turn you into a bitter, hateful, paranoid sort of person, right? And that's what we see happening in Godfrey here. Yes, I think we've all experienced this in our lives at some point or another. Okay, can you see the simile here? Okay, good. Those wrongdoings become like demons, right? They just move right in, which is also kind of personification. Who found in him a ready garnished home? Because obviously wrongdoings can't live within something. That's a tiny bit of personification there. All right, moving right along. Let's look at chapter 4. What's ironic on page 33? This is at the very top. This has to do with Dunstan the Lucky. He kills the horse. Yep. Let me ask you this. Did he have to race that horse in order to sell it? No. It was already sold, and it was already sold for a fair price, right? All the problems in this situation, not with the marriage, but with the financial problems, were going to be alleviated here. And he is impulsive and reckless enough that he gets caught up in this race, and Dunstan the Lucky kills the horse. So now he's not going to be able to sell it, right? You guys are, man, you're so rough on Romeo. Dunstan's a pretty terrible character. I think that Romeo needed to use his wits a little bit more, but I don't think he's quite as sinister as Dunstan. But that's okay. I like these connections that you're making. No love for Romeo. You guys have the best hashtags. Yeah, the impulsiveness is very much in line with Romeo. Yep. Okay, pull out some quotations that showcase Dunstan. Give me some characterization about Dunstan. I have some, but I would rather you guys pull it out. Okay, while you're looking, oh, you got one? Laurel, do you want to come on the mic and read it? Dunstan, whose nature it was to care more for immediate annoyances than for remote consequences. Yes, that's halfway down 33. That's pretty important. What else? He enjoyed the idea of the sound of knocking on the door, startling Silas. Yeah. His own ill-favored person, which was quite unmarketable, escaped without injury. Yep. These are good pieces of characterization. That's fine, Laurel. I read yours. Going on down page 33, there's this line that I feel like is pretty good too. Dunstan felt sure he could worry Godfrey into anything. Isn't that crazy? He feels pretty confident that he can make Godfrey anxious enough that he can control him. Oh, good. Sky just said that. Good. Godfrey is a worrywart. He is absolutely consumed with anxiety. Dunstan stole the money on an impulse, kind of, and that could be some characterization. Yes, he didn't even think twice about it. He just took the opportunity. And he didn't steal just what they needed. He stole everything. So, I mean, not that it would make it better that he only stole a little bit, but it was unnecessary for him to steal at all. But at least there's a reason for it. To steal everything is just mean and really inconsiderate, right? Okay. Does Dunstan remind you of anyone? Don't say your brother. You're just staring at the jester. Yeah, Dunstan kind of reminds me of a jester. He's tricky. I'll tell you who he reminds me of, okay? I think that Dunstan is Loki. Do you remember how George Eliot had that very classical education? She had more education than women would have had during this time. So she had that classical Greek education, but it's not out of the realm of possibility to think that she also had some Norse mythology background as well. Now, I don't know how much you know of Loki. If all you know is of the Avengers, okay, like that's sort of like Loki, but Loki was this sinister, self-absorbed, I will only help you if it helps me. I'm going to hurt you just because it's funny. Really terrible god of mischief. Every time I read this book, all I can think about is Dunstan is Loki. And if they ever made a movie of this, I feel like Tom Hiddleston should play Dunstan because he played Loki, but whatever. Even though Loki in the Marvel movies, it's not completely the same sort of Loki. Okay. So in actual Norse mythology, Loki is not cooler than Thor. In the movies, yes, because Loki's more of a supporting character, but they changed things up a little bit. The older brother in Scarlet Ibis, maybe a little bit, but I really think that Dunstan doesn't have any capacity to care for anybody but himself. All right, moving right along. Let's look at chapter 5. What time is it? Okay, we're almost to break time. Why is Silas unafraid of leaving his home unlocked? Good. One reason is because no one comes near him. He doesn't have friends. People are kind of skeptical of him, maybe a little fearful of him, so they don't want to cross him. If anyone were to steal it, they would find it. Yep. Okay, there's a bit of a storm going on, so he thinks that's kind of protection. He doesn't think anybody's going to steal from him, and he's not going to be gone long. So it's kind of all of those things. Okay, he really does not see, right, and he's never been robbed in his 15 years. That's right. And also, who knows that he has that money? Probably not really many people. I mean, it does say, the narrator does say that he could take bigger men than himself. So there has to be some sort of knowledge that he's got some money, but I'm not sure if they knew how much money he had. Okay, Page 30. Actually, sorry. I think this is actually page 40. Hold on. Yeah, that's a typo. This is page 40. There was a sort of refuge that always comes with the prostration of thought under an overpowering passion. It was that expectation of impossibilities, that belief in contradictory images, which is still distinct from madness because it is capable of being dissipated by the external fact. I think that this is kind of an interesting quote. If you look at the sentence right before it, it says, there was no untried refuge left for a moment's shelter from the terrible truth. So anyway, this is that first moment where we see that Silas is going to crumble. And so I just have that underlined because I think it's showing you this turning point that is happening. Right. There's like the only thing he really hoped in at this point was his money. And now all of that's gone. He no longer hopes in God. He no longer hopes in people, in relationship. And now he doesn't even have his money. So I think that's right. It's like a train wreck. And I think that this is that moment where we start to see the change. So what other changes begin to occur in Silas during this chapter? Okay, despair. We know that he must have been in despair at one point to come to this other town, right? But we don't really see that as much. Here we see utter despair. He's not sure what to do. He seems a little confused and not very confident at parts during this chapter. Good Sky, he lets people try to comfort him. All of a sudden, because everything else is stripped away, he realizes his only chance is to employ the help of other people, right? And the community begins to kind of accept him a little bit, which is interesting. We'll talk more about that in a little bit, I think. Let me see. Yeah, we're going to talk more about that in this next section. Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to break before we continue on with chapter 6 discussion. You guys are going to have breakout rooms today, don't worry. And we are going to do just a smidge of guided reading as well. Let's go to break for 4 minutes. We'll come back before 10:48, and I will see you then. Okay, we are back. Where were we? We were here. Okay, I'm going to put you guys into breakout rooms for chapter 6. All right. Chapter 6 is like this long, really detailed chapter. There's a lot of dialogue. There are a lot of characters. I want you to think about these 3 things. What role does the landlord play in this section? I want you to look at the quote on page 43. And I want you to think about, as a group, what is the point of this section? Why does Eliot even include it? And what insight does it give readers? So I know it can, on the surface, kind of seem like a purposeless chapter, but I want you to really think about what the point is. All right, so if you need to screenshot this, go ahead and do so. If not, I'll copy and paste into chat in just a little bit.
On page 43, the landlord says, "The truth lies between you. You're both right and both wrong, as I always say." What is the landlord saying? Do you agree or not? I think he's trying to say that, I mean, in every situation, there's two parts to the story, and we all have human nature. We all do wrong, and we all have, bright spots where we're actually right. But I think he's just saying how we need to not be so quick to think that we're always right, and how we need to see both sides of each story, meaning that you're both right and you're both wrong, and that there's always like two sides to the story.
Okay, breakout rooms are going to be closing very soon. There we go. All right, we're not going to talk about all of these, but I want to talk about the point of the section. I want to make sure we're all on the same page there. Why does Elliot include chapter 6? It's not just to take up space, make sure she meets her word requirement or anything like that. What is it? No, not to add 30 more pages. Yeah, you guys kind of struggled with this one. That's okay. It's a characterization chapter for the people in Raveloe. Can we get to know the community through Silas? Or did we? Have we? No, not at all, because he stays by himself. So we've gotten to know Squire Cass and his family a little bit, but not in relation to Silas, right? That's kind of like a separate narrative going on. So we really have not been able to get any sort of glimpse into Raveloe or get to know any of the people really, right? So chapter 6 gives us important characterization for the people of the town. It also gives us insight into what a night at the tavern maybe would have been like. So it gives us some social context as well and some historical context. Right, you can't learn about the hobbits from studying Gollum. That's correct, right? And then the last thing is that it shows that maybe this town is not quite as scary or quite as unforgiving or quite as unwelcoming as Silas perceived them to be. Because don't they all just kind of take this robbery as a town problem? Yeah, they do, right? Maybe it is partly Silas, but definitely we're getting this whole perception versus reality thing going on. So we see here that the town is ready to accept Silas, and part of that is because I think people are drawn to drama, and I don't think that will ever change. I think people like drama and they like action, and that's just life. And so they want to be mixed up in that a little bit. But part of it, I think, also is seeing that Silas is really like one of them. Okay? Right, you were surprised that they believed him because he has set himself off as this, right, they think he's kind of crazy. Exactly. They don't want a criminal in their community, and they want to help Silas. And this really is the first step into his integration back into society, so it's really important to pay attention to what that looks like. Have you noticed that Eliot uses satire in her writing? It's not as blatant as Mark Twain when you were reading Twain, but there are definitely some satirical pieces. Have you guys noticed those at all? Didn't notice it yet? It's mostly when she kind of breaks the wall a little bit, or when she starts talking about the people and characterizing them. Let me give you an example. In that first chapter, when she's setting up the people of Raveloe, she really kind of casts these broad overgeneralizations over the group of people, right? But here is, let's look at a couple of pieces. There will be satire here and satire here as well. So we're going to look at satire in both chapter 7, 8, and in chapter 10, okay? Describe Silas's incorporation back into society. This begins in chapter 7. Let's see where chapter 7 starts even. On page 51. Okay, people start to bring him things, whether it's food or they just stop by to see how he is, right? Which makes you realize that they're in this more than just for drama, although drama is part of it. They start trying to cheer him up. Doesn't always work. In fact, it says, there's a line in chapter 8 somewhere about how he knew they were trying to comfort him, but it didn't really work. I'll find it in a little bit. They invite him to church. Yep. He tells about the robbery. The town immediately decides to help him. It isn't like, let us think about it for a little bit. Let us see the evidence, right? They immediately decide to help him. Okay, he begins to let people into his house a little bit. He's talking to people more than he ever has. It kind of like takes down this wall of alienation. He doesn't have to be like, hey, look, I know that I haven't really been part of your community, but can I be now? It's just kind of like an instantaneous sort of thing, right? And you're going to see several characters emerge as actual friends to Silas in this moment. Right, they're starting to accept him through tragedy. There's another quote in here. I wish I had bookmarked this. There's another quote in here that talks about how he's not untouchable or something. It's that kind of idea. He's not untouchable. Bad things can happen to him too, and so the community is less skeptical of him. He does try to show appreciation at times. I have so many quotes underlined and I cannot seem to find the one that I'm looking for. Oh well, I don't want to spend a lot of time trying to figure it out. Okay. Oh yeah, go ahead, Jordan.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
So it's on page 72. The repulsion Marner had always created in his neighbors was partly dissipated by the new light in which this misfortune had shown him. Instead of a man who had more cunning than honest folks could come by, and, what was worse, had not the inclination to use that cunning in a neighborly way, it was now apparent that Silas had not cunning enough to keep his own.
Yes, that is the quote. And now I turned to 72 and it's like right there. I guess I was looking only in chapter 7, 8 there. But yes, that's exactly the quote that I was looking for. So great job. Oh, and then on page 74, that's the other quote that I was talking about. He had a sense that the old man meant to be good-natured and neighborly, but the kindness fell on him as sunshine falls on the wretched. He had no heart to taste it and felt that it was very far off him. So have you noticed that about advice today? Like even when somebody goes through something really horrific and you try to say things like, God will work all things to your good, or it's going to be okay, you're going to get through this, doesn't it kind of feel just like, ugh? It doesn't always help, right? It's true, but it doesn't always help. And so we're seeing that here with Silas as well. He can tell that they're trying to comfort him, but it's not helping him right now. That's kind of how things are with tragedy sometimes. Okay, page 63 contains an example of personification. Can you find it? It's in that last paragraph on page 63. Right, they're not being condescending to him. Well, you should have come to church. Now one person does think that. One person, I think it's on page 72 too. Yeah, Mr. Crackenthorpe, too, while he admonished Silas that his money had probably been taken him from because he thought too much of it and never came to church, and forced the doctrine by a present of pigs' petitos, well calculated to dissipate unfounded prejudice against the clerical character. So, like, they definitely have their own little thoughts and stuff, but they're not being, like, really condescending towards him. That is true. Yeah, God could have been like, nope. You can't place your faith in this, maybe. Okay, we really got to move on. The example of personification here is, when he awoke in the still morning darkness, he found it impossible to reawaken his evening thoughts. It was as if they had been tired out and were not to be roused to further work. So his thoughts can't be woken up. They can't be roused to further work. That's an example of personification. Okay, moving along. Chapter 10 actually begins with satire. So that is on page 70. Can you find the satire here? Just want to point out a couple examples so that you maybe will start seeing it in your reading this week. Justice Mallam was naturally regarded entirely in Raveloe as a man of capacious mind, seeing that he could draw much wider conclusions without evidence than could be expected of his neighbors who were not on the commission of the peace. It's that first sentence. What is satirical about it? Justice Mallam, seeing that he could draw much wider conclusions without evidence that could be expected of his neighbors. Okay, they're not real conclusions. There's no evidence, right? Basically, he only has power because his name is Justice, is what she's saying. So why don't you go to a common peasant and say, hey, you're now Justice whatever, and you also can draw wide conclusions without evidence, right? So this is satire. It's poking fun at the justice system, all right? I know it's not as blatant as it was with Twain. No, that's his title. Okay. He's part of the commission of the peace. So basically, just because you are in a position of power, it means that you don't have to have evidence, right? We've already talked about how the townspeople are treating Silas, so we're going to move away from that. How does Silas feel about this attention? He is beginning to accept it. He's at least not completely shying away from it. I think he's still pretty skeptical, but he realizes that he's literally at rock bottom. It's something that's very new to him. He's not loving it necessarily, right? He's tolerating it, we'll say, right now. Okay, pressing his head between his hands and moaning till the cold grasped him and told him that his fire was great is an example of which literary device? Good, personification. All right, moving on. We really don't have a whole lot of time. Okay, I'm going to put you guys in breakout rooms for about 5 minutes or so to discuss this. No, like three to 4 minutes, because that's all we've got, okay? Elliot is exploring social class in her novel, and you're meant to be seeing that already, okay? I want you to think about some examples that you see. There are a few hints for you if you want them here, but this is not extensive. There are other ways as well. You really need to start thinking about this idea of social class and what it means to be part of a community, okay? So let's go ahead and go to breakout rooms for this too. Again, like I said, 3 or 4 minutes, so you're really gonna have to get in and get started. You can't really wait around. Okay, remember you don't have much time, so you don't necessarily have to pull up a whiteboard, but you definitely need to be talking at this point about social class. Okay, we're just waiting for breakout rooms to fully close here. I have a couple people still in rooms. Okay, we are not really going to talk much about social class, but you do need to make sure that as you are reading, you continue to pay attention to social class, the way that Elliot presents social class, the responsibilities she places on social class, particularly those that are of higher social class. So really be thinking about those things as you read this week, okay? She has definitely scratched the surface on it, but she's really going to delve into it more as you're reading this week. We are not going to have much time to do this. I don't think we'll even get a couple of pages in, but this next section kind of gives us insight into some of the pressure surrounding women during the time. So we're going to read together. As we're reading chapter 11 together, watch for literary devices, obviously, characterization, insight into situations, behaviors of the upper class, because these are upper class women, and any tensions and conflict that you will find. We are definitely not going to get through page 101. We only got to page 88 in the first Monday section anyway. So beginning on page 84, we're going to look at chapter 11. I'm hoping we'll get at least a couple pages in so you can get some of that insight. But again, I don't know. All right, so page 11, make sure that you're annotating as we read. I may stop a little bit and tell you things that I find significant. If I mention them, you may want to highlight them or underline them or whatever. Okay, so here we go. Some women, I grant, would not appear to advantage seated on a pillion and attired in a drab Joseph and a drab beaver bonnet with a crown resembling a small stewpan, for a garment suggesting a coachman's greatcoat cut out under a exiguity of cloth that would only allow of miniature capes is not well adapted to conceal deficiencies of contour, nor is drab a color that will throw sallow cheeks into a lively contrast. It was all the greater triumph to Miss Nancy Lammeter's beauty that she looked thoroughly bewitching in that costume, as, seated on the pillion behind her tall, erect father, she held one arm around him and looked down with open-eyed anxiety at the treacherous, snow-covered pools and puddles which sent up formidable splashings of mud under the stamp of Dobbin's foot. Now, that's only 2 sentences, right? This is why sometimes Elliot is a little bit difficult to read. But yes, we're looking at the behaviors of upper class women now. But basically what it's saying is that clothing can only go so far, right? It can't make up for, let's see, it said contour. It can't make up for body shape. It can't make up for ugly color. Clothing can only cover up so much, basically, okay? And what you're supposed to be seeing here is that it doesn't matter what Nancy is wearing. She doesn't need any help. She's going to look great in whatever she's wearing. So keep that in mind as you see her interaction with some of the other women. A painter would perhaps have preferred her in those moments when she was free from self-consciousness, but certainly the bloom on her cheeks was at its highest point of contrast with the surrounding drab when she arrived at the door of the Red House and saw Mr. Godfrey Cass ready to lift her from the pillion. She wished her sister Priscilla had come up at the same time behind the servant, for then she would have contrived that Mr. Godfrey should have lifted off Priscilla first, and in the meantime she would have persuaded her father to go round to the horse block instead of alighting at the doorsteps. It was very painful when you had made it quite clear to a young man that you were determined not to marry him, however much he might wish it, that he would still continue to pay you marked attentions. Besides, why didn't he always show the same attentions? If he meant them sincerely, instead of being so strange as Mr. Godfrey Cass was, sometimes behaving as if he didn't want to speak to her and taking no notice of her for weeks and weeks, and then all of a sudden almost making love again. In this context, what it means is doting over her, giving her lots of attention, declaring his affection, that sort of thing. Moreover, it was quite plain he had no real love for her, else he would not let people have that to say of him, which they did say. Did he suppose that Mrs. Nancy Lammeter was to be won by any man, squire or no squire, who led a bad life? That was not what she had been used to see in her own father, who was the soberest and best man in the countryside, only a little hot and hasty now and then, if things were not done to the minute. All these thoughts rushed through Miss Nancy's mind in their habitual succession in the moments between her first sight of Mr. Godfrey Cass standing at the door and her own arrival there. Happily, the squire came out too and gave a loud greeting to her father, so that somehow, under cover of this noise, she seemed to find concealment for her confusion and neglect of any suitably formal behavior, while she was being lifted from the pillion by strong arms which seemed to find her ridiculously small and light. And there was the best reason for hastening into the house at once, since the snow was beginning to fall again, threatening an unpleasant journey for such guests as were still on the road. These were a small minority, for already the afternoon was beginning to decline, and there would not be too much time for the ladies who came from a distance to attire themselves in readiness for the early tea, which was to inspirit them for the dance. There was a buzz of voices through the house as Miss Nancy entered, mingled with the scrape of a fiddle preluding in the kitchen, but the Lammeters were guests whose arrival had evidently been thought of so much that it had been watched for from the windows. For Mrs. Kimball, who did the honors at the Red House on these great occasions, came forward to meet Miss Nancy in the hall and conduct her upstairs. Mrs. Kimball was the squire's sister as well as the doctor's wife, a double dignity, with which her diameter was in direct proportion. So that, a journey upstairs being rather fatiguing to her, she did not oppose Miss Nancy's request to be allowed to find her way alone to the blue room, where the Miss Lammeters' bandboxes had been deposited on their arrival in the morning. There was hardly a bedroom in the house where feminine compliments were not passing and feminine toilets going forward in various stages, in space made scanty by extra beds spread upon the floor. And Miss Nancy, as she entered the blue room, had to make her little formal curtsy to a group of 6. All right, so they are in, you're going to see them. Okay, just pay really special attention to how Nancy looks at these other women, okay? It sounds like the worst party ever. It doesn't have the makings of a good one so far. I like tea as well, but this one seems to have a lot of tension surrounding it. On the one hand, there were ladies no less important than the 2 Miss Guns, the wine merchant's daughters from Litherley, dressed in the height of fashion with the tightest skirts and the shortest waist, and gazed at by Miss Ladbroke of the old pastors with a shyness not unsustained by inward criticism. So think about everything that's going on here. Partly, Miss Ladbroke felt that her own skirt must be regarded as unduly lax by the Miss Guns, and partly that it was a pity the Miss Guns did not show that judgment which she herself would show if she were in their place by stopping a little on this side of the fashion. So not being like setting the trend, but, you know, being a little more modest, I guess. On the other hand, Mrs. Ladbroke was standing in skull cap in front, with her turban in her hand, curtsying and smiling blandly and saying, "After you, ma'am," to another lady in similar circumstances, who had politely offered the precedence at the looking-glass. But Miss Nancy had no sooner made her curtsy than an elderly lady came forward, whose full white muslin kerchief and mob cap round her curls of smooth gray hair were in daring contrast with the puffed yellow yellow satins and top-knotted caps of her neighbors. She approached Miss Nancy with much primness and said with a slow, treble suavity, "Niece, I hope I see you well in health." Miss Nancy kissed her aunt's cheek dutifully and answered, with the same sort of amiable primness, "Quite well, I thank you, aunt, and I hope I see you the same." "Thank you, niece, I keep my health for the present. And how is my brother-in-law?" These dutiful questions and answers were continued until it was ascertained in detail that the Lammeters were all as well as usual, and the Osgoods likewise, also that niece Priscilla must certainly arrive shortly, and that traveling on pillions in snowy weather was unpleasant, though Joseph was a great protection. So this is kind of like small talk. Then Nancy was formally introduced to her aunt's visitors, the Miss Guns, as being the daughters of a mother known to their mother, though now for the first time induced to make a journey into these parts, and these ladies were so taken by surprise at finding such a lovely face and figure in an out-of-the-way country place. This is that, remember that Raveloe is kind of separated from other turnpikes and stuff, so it's not really touched by the cities. So we're seeing that here as well. So they were so surprised that they began to feel some curiosity about the dress she would put on when she took off her Joseph. Miss Nancy, whose thoughts were always conducted with a propriety and moderation conspicuous in her manners, remarked to herself that the Miss Guns were rather hard-featured than otherwise, and that such very low dresses as they wore might have been attributed to vanity if their shoulders had been pretty, but that, being as they were, it was not reasonable to suppose that they showed their necks from a love of display, but rather from some obligation not inconsistent with sense and modesty. She felt convinced as she opened her box that this must be her Aunt Osgood's opinion, for Miss Nancy's mind resembled her aunt's to a degree that everybody said was surprising, considering the kinship was on Mr. Osgood's side, and though you might not have supposed it from the formality of their greeting, there was a devoted attachment and mutual admiration between aunt and niece. Even Miss Nancy's refusal of her cousin Gilbert Osgood, on the grounds solely that he was her cousin, which still would have been okay during this time period, though it had grieved her aunt greatly, had not in the least cooled the preference which had determined her to leave Nancy several of her hereditary ornaments, let Gilbert's future wife be whom she might. Okay, we're going to have to stop there because we just don't have time to carry on. So you'll have to pick up midway through page 87. Let's talk a little bit about a few of the things. Yes, Willie, it was a little bit like that, except for they're all making judgments about each other in their mind while saying that. Okay. You can't answer the last two questions here, so let's just talk about how does Nancy feel about Godfrey? This is important to realize. Yes, they are being very judgmental. We'll talk about that in just a second. Okay, she is so annoyed with Godfrey. That's right. Are you saying poor guy to Godfrey? He put himself in this mess. A Joseph is just a type of clothing, like travel clothing. All right, so how else does Nancy feel about Godfrey? Oh, good, Laura. I was hoping someone would say this. Not sure if Nancy hates Godfrey or loves him so much that she hates herself. She's confused. All right, so let's say she's conflicted, confused, whatever you want to say. She has already told him there's no way I would ever marry you, right? But then she says things like she blushes when she sees him, right? And she says that if he really loved her, then he would do this and that or whatever. So it's kind of this roller coaster. She's getting mixed signals from him. She doesn't like that. She doesn't respect him at this complete moment. So very interesting, right? Who are the Miss Guns? She could potentially really like the attentions guy. It doesn't seem like that yet, but as the party progresses, keep thinking about that. No, there are two Miss Guns. They are not from the countryside. Nope, they're not aunts. This is why sometimes having a character chart might be good. Her aunt is Mrs. Osgood. Her Mrs. Guns are wine merchants' daughters from the city. All right. So they are very fashionable. They are wealthy. They're from the city, and they're okay. Yes, they think that they are immodest, but they say, you know what? It's okay because they're ugly. Isn't that terrible? Like, that's basically what Nancy says. Because he's because he has a temper, because he doesn't make wise decisions. They don't know about the secret marriage, but they know that he's impulsive and that he has a temper, and he's very wishy-washy with her. And because of how wishy-washy he is with her, people assume that he is out chasing a bunch of different women. Exactly. So they're definitely judging each other, right? The Miss Guns are surprised to see someone pretty in the country like Nancy, and Nancy is surprised that they are so ugly but live in such high fashion clothing. Okay. So anyway, continue to take a look at what social class looks like, what these behaviors and parties look like as you continue on. Let's look at the week ahead. You actually are going to be picking up on page 87. So you'll read 87 through 172. I know that sounds like a lot, but the pace really does. I don't know if you'll believe me, but the pace really does pick up a little bit here because we're going to get into more plot. Okay. Do not read the short stories at the back. So you're only reading this amount right here, okay? Study for your vocab quiz. You will take it next week. You don't have to take it this week. Complete SMART lessons 7 through 9. Participate in the discussion forum, and do not forget your annotating journal. It is that time. If you have questions, you can stick around. If not, thank you for a great class. Thanks for sticking with this book. I know it's a little more complex. We're going to read the short stories next week, and I want you to stay with the class on that pacing, okay? All right, I will see you guys later.